And then we're going to try to keep 2 minutes for each person like we did the other day because we got a lot of stuff to go through here. So first of all, we're going to continue hearing on Senate Bill 81. And Nick, if you come up and talk about this bill just briefly, that kind of put us back on track. Sure.
Yeah, real fast, Mr. Chairman. Just a refresher for the committee. Senate Bill 81 is the bill that deals with economic development electric rates for certain new or expanded large commercial or industrial facilities. And the bill would prohibit a public utility from providing any such discounted economic development electric rate to facilities that operate with a very high peak demand. These would be facilities with a peak demand of 40 megawatts or more within the first 2 years of receiving service, and facilities that are projected to have a full-time workforce of less than 200 employees or that are not receiving service pursuant to a data center or large load tariff. And I'd be happy to stand for questions, Mr. Chair, but that's just a quick synopsis of the bill.
Okay, any questions, committee? Okay, we'll take off here. We're back on opposition oral, and it'll be Chuck Casely, Executive VP, Chief Consumer Officer of Evergy. Chuck, welcome to committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'll be brief. I know we got a lot to do today, so I've submitted written testimony. We don't disagree with the intent of this legislation. The intent, so far as we can gather, is that new large consumers, particularly data centers, pay their share of the infrastructure costs that they cause. We think that is absolutely critical. What we do not want to have is the boon, and it is a boon because there's a lot of beneficial things to data centers and other large manufacturers that would enter the state of Kansas. We don't want that to be done on the backs of existing customers, or that existing customers, existing businesses would subsidize the entry of somebody new into the market. Clearly, that would not benefit Kansans, and so we agree with the intent. Having said that, we would ask to pause on this because we don't think legislation is maybe the best way to go about this. First of all, it will absolutely have a chilling effect on large load manufacturers and data centers looking at Kansas, and we do ultimately want them to be here. They bring jobs, they bring tax base. In the case of data centers, they'll bring 3, 4, 5 years from now artificial intelligence use cases for some of the biggest industries in Kansas. And data centers themselves don't require a lot of infrastructure other than electrical service and electrical power. So they're not a drain that some of the other larger manufacturers can be for infrastructure in a state. We think it's good that they come here. There's a lot of benefits. Those benefits are all in my testimony, so let me just say this. Later this week, Evergy is going to be introducing what we're calling our LLPS tariff, our Large Load Power Service Tariff. It addresses this very thing. It addresses the fact that large customers that come to Kansas are going to cause incremental infrastructure to be built, and that incremental infrastructure and the acceleration of infrastructure generally, they need to pay their share of that cost so it doesn't hurt Kansans. We've got a way to do that. We'd like to do it in front of the Kansas Corporation Commission, who have the experts, have the staff. It's a wide open stakeholder proceeding. It'll go for the better part of this year, and we would like to try that first. I would also just add in closing that we think there are probably some things about the existing economic development riders that need to be tweaked anyway, that as we've developed them over the last 5 years, they could take another look. And so one of the things we're going to do after the committee hearing today is meet with some of the proponents of this legislation and talk about economic development riders generally and see if there's some things we can do to make them more consumer friendly in Kansas. And with that, I'll stand for questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, that was the only oral opposition. We've got written opposition that's in your file. We got a Deborah Tiffel, second Vice President, Kansas Economic Development Alliance, and Rachel Willis, Director of Legislative Affairs, Department of Commerce. So you got a copy of their testimony in here. So now we go to neutral oral, and Josh, you're going to do this one, right? Or, okay. Kimberly, Jen Kerr, Swati, Kansas Municipal Utility, that's on the second one, isn't it?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I will be fast, and sorry, we're switching roles. So I'm going to testify on this bill, and Josh is going to testify on 167, if that's okay. So I do appear on behalf of Kansas Municipal Utilities this afternoon, and we are neutral on Senate Bill 81, and we're neutral for a couple of reasons. Chiefly, the bill as written does not apply to municipal utilities. So we are neutral for that standpoint. But like Chuck just said, or Mr. Casely just said, we do believe that this bill could potentially have a chilling effect on the industry, and it is an advanced industry that is really looking at the state of Kansas. And we have several municipal utilities in both some of our smaller communities and in some of our larger communities that are looking at a partnership agreement with our municipal utilities, and we would hesitate to have a piece of legislation that could send any sort of mixed messages about the welcoming, I guess, how welcome Kansas is to their presence in our community. And for our municipal utilities, we are locally elected. We're governed by our city councilors or city councils or our Board of Public Utilities. So we work hand in glove with our economic development directors and EcoDevo communities. And in most of those communities, data centers would be a really great fit because they don't put a lot of burden on additional infrastructure. It's not like new schools necessarily need to be built or new roads. And in the case of data centers, the data center developer pays for a lot of the upfront infrastructure costs, which can ultimately help benefit the system, and then, of course, provide access to that strong baseload power need all the time, which does nothing then other than helping us continue to keep our rates low. So we do stand in support of Senate Bill 81. We're also downstairs in Senate Commerce testifying in support of Senate Bill 51, which does do more to encourage data centers and development in the state because of the fact that we do see this as a real benefit to our state's economy. So thank you so much.
Okay.
I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Kimberly. Okay, next we have Justin Grady, Deputy Director, Utilities Division, Kansas Corporation Commission. Justin, welcome to committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Fagg, members of the committee. My name is Justin Grady. I'm the Deputy Director of the Utilities Division at the KCC. I'll be brief as well. Our testimony is neutral on Senate Bill 91. We view the entire issue of economic development riders, whether customers qualify for those riders and what types of customers, that's all very much a policy issue in the hands of the legislature, within the purview of the legislature. There are certainly benefits to these types of customers that can accrue to utility systems and their customers. Large load, stable load customers add a lot of billing determinants to the denominator of the equation. The key there is as long as they're not also adding extra incremental costs over and above that need to be covered. We also consider this a very timely topic, and we're glad that it was raised. As Evergy mentioned, we've been involved in discussions with Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board and Evergy for several months now, talking about parameters of what a large load tariff might look like. I think in my written testimony, I said it'll be here within a couple weeks. It sounds like it's going to be here by the end of this week. So it's definitely a timely conversation to have. And, we will be a part of the conversation as it moves forward. So other than that, look forward to answering any questions that the committee has at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Okay. So do we have any other proponents? Opponents? Or neutral testimony that has not been submitted at this time? Okay, committee, I'd open up if there's any questions on this.
To a point of order, Mr. Chairman, online it lists Justin as proponent testimony, but in my agenda, it lists him as neutral testimony. So I'm wondering, were you presenting neutral there?
Yes, neutral.
It should be neutral.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question too.
Sure. Go ahead.
Ms. Swati, while I was listening to you, I was thinking about Finney County, Garden City, that has a municipal utility. Sometimes I think they bought the gas turbines just so they could play with the rest of the municipal utilities, but it's idle most of the time because they're buying wind power. Your whole organization, I assume, buys on the free market or has other generation. So might not these data centers locate adjacent to facilities like that maybe are already there and could be a stable power source? Just thought.
So Senator, I might switch hats a little bit. So from the Advanced Power Alliance standpoint, that's one of the provisions that we support. We're not taking a position on Senate Bill 51 talking about incentives that the state might offer, but what we are saying is from the advanced power industry standpoint, we have a lot of power that is in operation today, some of which is spoken for, some of it just goes into the market, that can absolutely be utilized to power the data centers. So then our more conventional based generation can in fact be used for homes and businesses and industries. So we see that as a huge opportunity to either build for them and interconnect with the grid or to build behind the meter generation, which could be a real benefit for the state.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, committee, we got any other questions? Okay, there is a fiscal note. It's also in your file that you can read on this. So at this time, we'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 81, and we will continue opening the hearing on Senate Bill 82, and that's extending the time in which the State Corporation Commission shall make a final order on a transmission line siting application. So, Nick, if you come and give us a brief, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, committee members. Committee members, real fast, just real high-level current law overview. So as I briefed you earlier on in this year, the current law authorizes the KCC to approve and permit the siting of certain high-voltage transmission line projects. These are transmission line projects that are 230 kilovolts or more and 5 miles or more in length. Basically, a public utility, if they are wishing to build one of these transmission lines, has to apply to the KCC and get a transmission line siting permit for the construction of the line. So current statute, in this statute, it requires the KCC to issue an order within 120 days following the KCC's receipt of the application. So what this bill would do is it would extend that deadline to 180 days. So under the provisions of this bill, the KCC would have 180 days instead of 120 days to issue a final order on a transmission line siting permit. And I'd be happy to stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, we have any questions for Nick on 92? Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll go to proponents oral. We got Justin Grady back, Deputy Director, Utilities Division, Kansas Corporation Commission.
Well, Chair Fagg, members of the committee, good afternoon again. Long time no see. My name is Justin Grady. I'm Deputy Director of the Utilities Division. Appreciate the opportunity to be here this afternoon. We are proponents of Senate Bill 92. We propose this legislation to provide a 60-day extension to the deadline that the commission has to issue an order in these line siting proceedings. The reason that we did this is because 120 days is a very expedited time frame to conduct a proceeding as extensive and significant as a transmission line siting proceeding. And more specifically, we believe that this extension will allow landowners the opportunity to more meaningfully participate in these proceedings. We mentioned in the written testimony that while these projects are beneficial to the state, if they get a siting permit, they're beneficial to the state. But ultimately, the landowners in and around the vicinity of these projects may very well be impacted by them for decades to come. And so our view is that we owe it to the landowners to provide them that opportunity to really have meaningful participation and input in the process. 120 days might not sound expedited, depending on your background and your context, but on page 2 of my written testimony, I have an example of a procedural schedule that we used the last time we did one of these line citing proceedings last summer. And if you look at that schedule, you really can tell just how expedited it is. In that proceeding, that application was filed on May 31st, 2024, and notice was given to landowners that the transmission line might impact their property on June 20th, 2024. By statute, that was the requirement in terms of how long we had to give those landowners for notice to be able to provide testimony at a public hearing. That was just 8 business days before the next deadline, which was the requirement to file testimony, written testimony, and intervene in the proceeding at the KCC. And then the public hearing in that case was just 7 days later, after July 3rd. So the public hearing in that case was July 10th. And the cutoff to provide oral comment or written comment back to the KCC was on July 15th. And so you can see as you look through that schedule, it's just an exceptionally expedited time frame to be able to evaluate something as consequential and impactful as where to put a large, high volume transmission line in the state of Kansas. And the last thing I'll leave you with, because I know we're limited on time, is a 120-day period of time makes it almost impossible to consider an alternative route that wasn't originally contemplated when the application was filed. With that line citing application this summer, the utility in that case was Greenbelt Express. It actually worked with the impacted landowners and came up with an alternative route that was going to impact a different out-of-state landowner, but would make the impact on in-state landowners less significant. There actually was not enough time to evaluate that alternative route, and so the utility in that case actually settled the case. They agreed to file a completely separate follow-on application a few months later with its own 120-day deadline. So that's an example of the inefficiency and really just the waste of time and resources that can occur when you do find an alternative route like that. There's just not enough time to evaluate it in 120 days. So with that, I will stand for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Okay, got proponents written. Joseph Astra with Curb, and also Jackie Garagiola, Associate Counsel, Kansas Livestock and Kansas Farm Bureau. So now we'll move into neutral oral, and we got Reagan McLeod, Director of Government Relations, Kansas Electric Cooperatives. Reagan, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I will keep it as brief as possible. I think a lot of the comments that were made by the proponents are valid. I also think you'll hear from the opponent conferees as well, and we hear some truth to those as well. So just to keep it as brief as possible, we understand that there are some concerns with costs being passed on to our ratepayers, but we also understand that our members are landowners. And so their concerns and their ability to participate in this process is important to us too. So with that, I will cut it off and stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Chuck Castley, Executive Vice President, Chief Consumer Officer for Evergy. Welcome back to committee, Chuck.
I was just here. Real brief, I agree with everything that Mr. Grady said. It's that we're officially neutral, but we don't object to this bill. Our chief concerns are that probably the most important thing in locating larger customers here in the state is being able to get power to them quickly. And to the extent that that would slow this down or impact potentially reliability, it causes us time for concern. Fortunately, we've had lots of good conversations with the proponents, and I think we're going to propose some language in here and during this process that would simply say that if it can be done sooner than the 180 days and accommodated fairly, then that would be the goal. In our case, we only use eminent domain on transmission lines between 5 and 10% of the property owners that we deal with, which is well below most of the other national average for that kind of thing. So we think we can respect landowners, expedite the process in many cases, and have fair outcomes, and just want that flexibility. Having said that, we're not against this, and appreciate the time before the committee today.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any other proponents? Opponents, or neutral testimony that, at this time? Okay, committee, do we have any questions? I'll open this up to the committee on any questions we might have with what they're trying to do here. Senator Clifford.
Thanks. Yeah, first, apologies to Mr. Grady. I was on the wrong bill. But will this give our landowners, they'll feel a little less coerced into this settlement? Do you think that helps? Because I represent, a huge territory in the Southwest, so my landowners face the prospects of this process. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at that schedule that was in my written testimony, as I mentioned, it's just everything is so tight and so crammed together. And it's that way because you can't move any one of those dates more than a day or two either way, because everything else, it's like a domino effect. All the dates stack on top of each other. And so we hear constantly in these proceedings that landowners feel like it's rushed. They feel like there isn't an adequate opportunity for them to express their concerns or to evaluate alternative routes. And our response, frankly, is this is a legislatively mandated 120-day process, and we do not have the opportunity to extend this. We don't have any discretion in that regard. So I'm certainly hopeful that with this additional 60 days, the time that's going to be allotted is additional time for the landowners to get notice earlier, to have notice earlier than with more difference between the time they get notice and the time that they come in to file testimony. And there will be additional time between the public hearing and when we cut off public hearing comment periods. And so everything that we have in mind to do with this 60 days is oriented around landowner participation and comment. It's not to give the KCC more time to do our work.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. So I like how you're thinking. You're going to weave these days into the schedule. They're not stuck on the end.
Absolutely.
Where it is. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else on the committee? Okay, we'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 92, and we'll move into hearing on SB 167, prohibiting electric public utilities from recovering from ratepayers the costs associated with electric vehicle charging stations and requiring electric public utilities to establish electric vehicle charging service rate schedules. So with the bill overview, we got Nick Myers. Nick, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, committee. So Senate Bill 167, as the chairman said, is concerning electric vehicle charging stations and how public utilities treat electric vehicle charging stations, both the charging stations that may be owned and operated by the public utility and the charging stations that are owned and operated by private entities. So as the chair said, generally this bill would prohibit electric public utilities from recovering in their retail rates any costs associated with the public utilities provision of electric vehicle charging stations. And then it would also require some uniform rate schedules, and we'll get into those right now. So I just want to start out, Section 1 of the bill. If you look at the bill, that defines a lot of the terminology that is used in the bill, and you can look through those terms there. I don't really have any that I specifically want to highlight. Section 2 of the bill, this is the section that would prohibit an electric public utility from recovering from their retail ratepayers any costs involved with constructing, installing, maintaining, operating, or owning electric vehicle charging stations by the public utility if those charging stations are for public use. So additionally, this subsection or this section would prohibit a public utility from directly or indirectly using any revenue that they receive from retail ratepayers to subsidize their investments in electric vehicle charging stations. And this section would then state that if a public utility does desire to construct, install, operate, or maintain an EV charging station for public use, that utility has to do so under a separate and non-regulated private business entity. So that has to be separate from the public utilities books. And then also that public utility has to offer those EV charging services on an equitable and a non-discriminatory basis under the same terms and conditions that they would otherwise offer to private providers of EV charging services. The section 2C does state that the section shall not be construed to prohibit a public utility from providing the necessary infrastructure to service the electricity needs of a EV charging station, nor shall it prohibit a public utility from operating an EV charging station for its own private use with its own vehicle fleet. Section 3 of the bill then deals with establishment of electric vehicle charging service tariffs and rate schedules. So what this section would state is that that an electric public utility has to, by a date certain, establish a commercial direct current fast charging station rate schedule for private providers of EV charging services. And this rate schedule has to use something different than a traditional demand-based rate structure. Essentially, it has to be charged on a per kilowatt hour usage basis. And then it also would require that this rate schedule or tariff establish the terms and conditions for the provision of electric service to that private EV station. Lastly, the bill in this section 3 would state that for public utilities that are regulated by the KCC, they have to file those rate schedules required by this bill on or before October 1 of 2025. And then the commission would be required to make a ruling on that or amend that rate schedule within 120 days after the public utilities filing. And then any other electric public utilities, i.e. municipalities, cooperatives that are not subject to KCC regulation, they would have to file their rate schedules and publish those rate schedules on or by October 1, 2025 as well. And Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Committee, we got any questions for Nick? Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You sound a little croaky today. Thank you, Nick. Are there any mandates, federal mandates that utilities own a certain number of electric vehicle charging stations? Any kind of mandates at all that we're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of, but I haven't investigated that.
So it's as far as we know, it's a purely elective decision on their own to own EV charging stations or anybody else, private industry.
For a private industry? Yes. Yeah, for a public utility that's rate regulated by the KCC, they would be filing docket actions
To recover the cost.
to recover costs or to propose the plans that they would might be doing with regard to EV charging stations.
All right, thanks, Nick. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, any other questions? Okay, thank you, Nick. We have 4 written proponents. So that's in your file there. Opponents oral. I have Mike Morley, Director of Corporate. No, I'll take that back. We're going to go to proponents here. I jumped ahead here. Thank you. We need to do proponent first oral, and we got Ted Augustine, President of Triplet Incorporated. Ted, welcome to committee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of SB 167. My name is Ted Augustine, and I am the president of Triplet Inc., which owns and operates 24/7 travel stores based in Salina. We have been operating since 1963. My grandpa founded it in 1963. I'm a third-generation business owner. 24/7 has 10 locations along the I-70 and I-135 corridors throughout Kansas. We have a proven track record of deploying EV fast chargers at our retail locations, with 5 of our 10 locations having them. And we hope to continue to make that investment as the market develops. SB 167 will provide certainty for companies like 24/7 who want to enter this market, but have concerns about making the substantial capital investments to construct EV fast chargers without guardrails to protect their investment from being undercut by electric utility-owned EV fast chargers. Electric utilities have the ability to underwrite the costs of EV charging stations to their ratepayers while collecting a guaranteed rate of return. Private companies such as 24/7 travel stores do not have access to this type of risk-free capital. Furthermore, many electric utilities bill private EV fast charging station owners more money for electricity than their own cost to power their utility-owned chargers. This legislation would ensure that electric utilities charge themselves the same rates they offer to other private businesses, ensuring all EV fast charging providers have access to the same electricity rates on a level playing field is a critical guardrail to ensure fair competition. In order to implement this policy, SB 167 would require electric utilities to own EV fast charging stations through an unregulated subsidiary, which would ensure they could compete fairly in the free market without an unfair pricing advantage. Fuel retailers and electric utilities are natural partners when it comes to building out Kansas's EV fast charging station network. This bill will facilitate that partnership by directing fuel retailers and electric utilities alike to focus on their core competencies, with fuel retailers providing a positive customer experience for EV drivers and electric utilities generating power and delivering that power to EV fast charging stations. 24/7 stands ready to continue to invest and innovate within this space, but what we need is a good public policy that ensures fair competition. Thank you again for the opportunity to provide testimony on this important topic, and I encourage you to support SB 167. I will be happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Okay, Ted, thank you.
Thank you.
I think we'll hold questions to the end here. Next, we have Brian Postler, Executive Director at Fuel True. So, Brian, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee for allowing my testimony today. I am Brian Postler. I'm the Executive Director for Fuel True Independent Energy and Convenience. We represent all the independent fuel distributors in the state, as well as all the fuel retailers, of which there are more than 2,000, including stations in every county and in all of your districts. Now, the businesses that are members of mine, like Ted's, have a real need to be able to create and build these electric chargers. I think EVs are probably the future. We're going to see more and more of them on the road over the years. And if fueling stations are going to survive, they have to transition or allow for not only liquid fuels, but for electric charging networks. One of your most sacred duties as legislators is to make sure that there is a level playing field and fair competition, just so that our members have a chance to compete in this area. And so just a little bit of a story. My written testimony is there, so please refer to that. But just a little story. Ted has chargers, put 2 chargers in at Maple Hill, closest exit here to Topeka, where they have a store. Costs almost $500,000 to put in the chargers. But to sell electricity there, they have to pay, and they're Evergy customers at that station, but they have to pay their base rate, they have to pay the transmission fees, they have to pay their franchise fees, they have to pay pretty hefty demand charges, and to do all of that, that means to pretty much break even, right, which is about what they're doing. They're not quite at even. They're losing a little bit of money right now, but hopefully with more demand, it'll get to profitable. They have to charge 59 cents a kilowatt hour in order to make that work, right? Conversely, over in the 800 block of Kansas Avenue, Evergy has their own charging stations, and I can go charge my EV if I have one over there for 18 cents a kilowatt hour. 18 cents versus 59 cents. Now, how can Evergy do that? Well, it's because they're charging themselves a different rate than they charge the private competitors, and they're subsidizing what they do with their EV networks, not having to put in the $500,000 of their own capital, but they can use all the ratepayers to help contribute to that cost. So all of us who are Evergy customers, myself included, as part of our rates, are paying to subsidize for that network. That is not free, that is not fair, that is not an even playing field. So with this bill, we can try to ensure that all the customers, sorry, my time is up. I will take any more questions at the appropriate time, but thank you for your testimony.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Next, we have Robert Barata, Americans for Affordable Clean Energy. Robert, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm delighted to be here today. My name is Robert Barata, and I'm the Executive Director of Americans for Affordable Clean Energy. It's a fancy name, but we are a coalition of, I would say, the most forward-thinking fuel retailers in the country. Names that you'll see along the interstate as you go through Love's, Travel Centers of America, Quick Trip, Racetrack, among others. And I'm here today in support of Senate Bill 167. Our members believe that this bill will give them and anyone else who wants, in the private sector, that wants to get into the electric vehicle fast charging business, the statutory certainty in Kansas in order to make the significant investments that it will take for the private sector to put these chargers in as part of Kansas's transportation fueling infrastructure. I would point out that today the Kansas Corporation Commission has determined through the most recent dockets that there will be no rate basing of these chargers. That gives us some comfort for now, but that could change. What we're looking for is a codification of that decision so that we can start making these investments in a rational manner. I want to point out to you finally that Kansas occupies a critical point along the nation's transportation corridor. It's not just Kansans that are using that; it's trucks and I would say people just passing through Kansas, and our ability to take care of our customers is important to us. If our customers want to put sweet tea in their vehicles, then we want to be able to do that. And so electricity is just one component of it. We probably will be seeing hydrogen and some other fuels as well. But we are urging you to pass this bill to give us the certainty to make those investments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Thank you, Robert. Okay, at this point, we'll move to opponents oral. So we're ready for Mike Morley now, Director of Corporate Communications and Government Relations, Midwest Energy. Mike, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Chairman Fagg, Ranking Member Francisco. My name is Mike Morley. I'm Communications Director and Government Affairs for Midwest Energy. We're an electric co-op based in Hayes. We serve 50,000 customers in the western half of the state, and we serve pretty much the entire I-70 corridor, starting in Hayes all the way out to the Colorado border. We have a long history with EV fast chargers. We deployed our first one back in 2014. We currently have 7 that I know of DC fast chargers on our system, and then dozens and dozens of level 2 chargers, which are a little bit slower chargers within our system as well. I wasn't sure exactly where to begin on this bill because from the utility perspective, there's a lot not to like. The first is an edict that says you can no longer charge a demand charge to a certain class of customers who are perhaps the worst load profile on a utility system. And I'll explain what that means. A couple weeks ago, you heard testimony from Cuyahoga. They were talking about oil load on the system and how they're billed in the state. Oil load is very, very consistent. It has a high load profile, meaning that you have a pump that has maybe 20 kilowatts of demand, and you run that pump 23, 24 hours a day. So it's used at about a 90% efficiency. So keep those numbers in mind, 20 kW, 90%. That's a wonderful load. An EV fast charger, and by the way, full disclosure, I drove here in an EV today, a Ford Lightning from Hayes, and I had to stop in Salina and plug in to charge outside of a Casey's there. I plugged my truck in. 90 seconds later, I was pulling 180 kW of load. To give that some perspective, the average residential home in Midwest system peaks out at about 7 kW. So within 90 seconds, I added 25 homes worth of load to that circuit. The convenience store right next to me was probably pulling 30 to 40 kW of load. So 4.5 convenience stores that went on just like that. 20 minutes later, my charge is done, it drops off. There are 4 chargers at that location. Imagine if 4 trucks had came and plugged in at that time and pulled the 180. It's tremendous load, very difficult to serve from a utility's perspective. So the demand charge is the reasonable way to recover that cost. Absent that, we have to spread those charges among other rate classes, and it becomes very unequitable. I see I'm out of time, so I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Next, we got Reagan McLeod, Director of Government Relations, Kansas Electric Cooperatives. Reagan, welcome back to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Somebody else already said long time no see, so I guess I can't take that one. It's tough to follow Mike, but I will hit on a couple things that he didn't mention during his testimony and kind of talk from more the statewide perspective. I want to be clear about one thing. There was a comment made earlier about a guaranteed rate of return as it applies to utilities. That is not the case for electric cooperatives. We are self-rate regulated, not-for-profit member-owned cooperatives. Any cooperative providing EV charging stations is not generating any type of profit from that charging station, and we would stand opposed to any type of efforts to prevent our cooperatives from having that ability to do so. Again, there is no profit motive for electric cooperatives, and I wanted to make that extremely clear that at least that type of argument does not apply to electric cooperatives. But I do want to be also clear about something else. In my testimony here, I provided an amendment or a proposed amendment that I would like the committee to consider if you were to move forward with this legislation. We do have member cooperatives who are owners of wholly owned not-for-profit subsidiaries. You know, that subsidiary might not itself be a cooperative, but is a not-for-profit electric utility. I provided a proposed amendment here that would exclude not-for-profit cooperatives from this legislation. And I hope that you direct your attention to that, as well as the fact, and kind of, I divided my testimony into three kind of points of argumentation, but the third one in paragraph second, just flip your page over. It's the first paragraph on the second page, refers to the fact that this would be the first instance in state statute where cooperatives are rate regulated in some situation. I think that's important. I do not see the point in specifically highlighting this area as something where cooperatives are required to rate regulate in a certain way. So with that, I will stand for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Reagan. So we got Chuck Hazley. He's on a three-peat. You're doing better than Chiefs, Chuck. So.
You know, if we could just do another bill today, Mr. Chairman, I might be able to hit for the cycle. So I'd like to say a couple things on the bill. We are opposed to the bill as it is currently drafted, and hopefully maybe you give me 30 seconds to respond to a very specific thing, naming our company. So we support EVs and we support EV expansion. It's something that we've been involved in back in 2014, 2015, when nobody, and I mean nobody, other than utilities was talking about electric vehicles. In fact, back in 2015, a lot of the gas stations who are members of the organizations testifying today, we actually went to and asked to put them in their facilities at our cost, and were turned down for one reason or another. We are not against EVs. We support EVs. There's a lot of reasons for utilities to be involved in electric vehicle charging. They're listed in my written testimony, but perhaps the biggest is because for-profit entities who are not infrastructure companies put facilities where they're going to be profitable. Utilities have to work with everybody, everywhere, all the time. And so we put them where they are needed. And so far rural areas, urban cores, places that don't have access to electric vehicle infrastructure, that's where we've historically put them. Talked about level playing field. That's a red herring, at least in respect to Evergy. Currently, there are just under 600 public electric vehicle charging stations in the state of Kansas. Of those, Evergy has 110. That 110, 105 of them were put in between 2015 and 2021. They were put in at shareholder expense. They are not subsidized. That is something our shareholders did in Kansas. Why? Because the Kansas Corporation Commission has already ruled multiple times that the charging stations themselves cannot be recovered in rates. So it is absolutely false to say that anybody other than our shareholders did that. Now, between 2021 and 2025, we put in 5 more, from 105 to 110, just where it was needed. In fact, there's a 4-factor test we have to pass in order to put one in. In that time period, electric vehicle charging stations, largely in response to demand, more than doubled in Kansas. We are not competition. The final thing that I'd like to talk about, and then I want us to talk about specifically the charging station you can go see later today on Kansas Avenue, is the demand charge. The demand charge is just what my colleague said earlier, which is it compensates for the cost of delivering electricity to larger users and sporadic users. If it's not a demand charge, there has to be something else. Otherwise, currently, it'll mean tens of millions of dollars a year subsidized by residential customers and other business customers in order to allow these things to go in. Tens of millions. At scale, it could be hundreds of millions. It's a subsidy, and it's a subsidy that not one other business in our service territory gets. They all have demand charges. Specifically to Kansas Avenue, that 18 cents versus 59 cents. In 2021, we collaborated with the proponents, some of the proponents of this bill, to deregulate electricity in the state for electric vehicle charging stations. What do I mean? I mean, we said you can charge whatever you would like. There was a prohibition on that within our service territory, and unlike almost every other state in the country, we agreed to deregulate it to allow them to be able to recover. We would charge them a tariffed rate that would include a demand charge, and they could recover by kilowatt hour whatever they would like at their charging station. They have chosen 59 cents because that's where they almost break even. We have chosen 18 cents, which is the tariffed rate approved by the Kansas Corporation Commission for all customers in that situation, because our shareholders are eating the cost of that Kansas Avenue fast charging station. We pay for it. It is there as a service and to encourage electric vehicle charging and to be there as a resource, and we have lost money on it. In fact, on our books, we have still not recovered the investment it took to put that in there. That is an even playing field. We are not a threat. We would love to see the expansion. The Kansas Corporation Commission has already ruled on this multiple times, and since 2021, when the vehicles really started to appear on the scene, we've put up 5 stations. Our alleged competitors have more than doubled the number they have out there. With that, I will rest and take questions at the appropriate time.
Okay, thank you, Jack. We got a neutral oral, so Justin Grady, Deputy Director, Utilities Division, Kansas Corporation Commission. Welcome back, Justin.
Thank you, Chair Fagg. Members of the committee, my testimony is pretty self-explanatory in its written form. I really don't have a lot additional to add here this afternoon. Certainly would entertain any questions that the committee has about the KCC's previous rulings in terms of Evergy's ability to rate base their charging stations. Evergy customers today are not paying for those electric vehicle charging stations. I've got links included in the written testimony where you can go and go look at those dockets yourself and read the orders, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have or provide any clarifications that I can about the written testimony at the appropriate time. So thank you.
Okay. Committee, we have any questions at this time? Okay. Senator Clays.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know who to ask this question to. I'm just trying to square my experience with what I'm hearing today. And I'm hearing 18 cents, and I'm hearing 59 cents, but I just filled up my Tesla about 2 hours ago for 34 cents. So, I mean, just make it real for me. What's happening here? Why am I getting 34, which seems to be kind of an average between those two? What's going on?
So we can't, our company, and we're differently positioned than municipals and co-ops, but our company can't charge a kilowatt hour rate that isn't tariffed and that we're not given permission to. And so when it comes to electric vehicle charging, we apply the rate class or the rate code that is approved, and that's what gets charged there. In 2021, I believe, this body passed Senate or House Bill 2145, I believe, which basically said, while we have to charge a tariffed rate, it allowed anybody else who put up a charging station in the state to charge the rate that they, per kilowatt hour, that they thought was appropriate. And I can't speak for Tesla or the other entities here today, but I imagine what they're doing is they're looking at their investment. They're looking at what it charges. You know, we charge them for electricity, which is a tariffed rate, and they're making a business decision about what kilowatt hour rate they should charge in order to recover that cost and ultimately be profitable. I imagine for Tesla, who does things at scale and is a publicly traded company and has, you know, thousands upon thousands of charging stations, it's probably different than an entity that has, you know, fewer stations, fewer volume, things like that. But that's probably what is driving it. The fact of the matter is, we have to charge what the state tells us we're allowed to charge, whereas 2145 made it possible for others to charge whatever they think the market will bear.
Okay, thank you, Chuck. Thank you. I made a mistake. I missed an opponent. Josh Swati, Kansas Municipal Utilities, is an opponent. Josh, I apologize.
That's all right, Mr. Chairman. I so rarely get to come in front of this committee. I about got cut out of it today. So just in a few other moments, I'll share a couple of other things. We second what was said primarily by the electric cooperatives earlier. We are publicly owned by our communities in most cases, and then specifically to this, and particularly the demand charge. I'm going to get ahead of my skis here, but I think just about any community along I-70 that's around Midwest service territory that is not in Midwest would be a municipal utility, and some of those communities are very small. Their fuel retailers on I-70 are probably the largest business they have in town anyway, and if we were not allowed to do demand service charges to an electric vehicle charging station at that fueling station, that would quickly be the biggest electric pole on that system in that community by a long shot. And so we would certainly, at the very least, suggest that we shouldn't be included in the bill just because of the governance structure of the municipal utilities, similar to that of cooperatives. But that's kind of the situation that they would be in, particularly along those I-70 corridors.
Josh, thank you. Committee, we have any other questions? Senator Thompson.
Just a real quick one. I remember, was it last fall or maybe late last summer, the governor used federal grant money, $6.8 million to purchase 9 EV stations. That calculates out to about $755,000 per station. Is that right? Because I heard you say it was like $500,000 for one or for two. Yeah, Ted.
Yes, it's not an off the wall number as far as your quick math goes there. We did install 2. We did Maple Hill and Abilene as part of a Volkswagen Settlement Fund grant that was administered by KDOT. Those 2 we spent just roughly over $900,000 on for 2 separate sites. Both have 2 charging points, so for 4 total charging points. But that does include installing a canopy over top of those. So roughly that's about $200,000 of that. So you're looking at $350,000 to install 2 DC fast charging points capable of doing 360 kilowatts.
Okay. That sets a fairly high bar for making a profit, I would imagine.
Yes, it does. And if I can respond to your question as well, just briefly, we are subject to demand charges. It is a volume game, so as volume picks up, that does become less detrimental. But given the number of cars on the road today, is where we're required in order to recover electricity costs. And this is math I ran on my own to try and determine what do I need to charge to even just break even, not recover my multi-$100,000 investment, was 59 cents a kilowatt hour. That 18 cents a kilowatt hour, there is a specific KCC rate for the first 350 charging stations, utility-owned charging stations that aren't subject to that same demand charge. I'm not sure when that was put in place, but that is where that's from my knowledge where that 18 cents comes from. And that in there lies part of the problem, is they're charging the customer like they are just another metered customer. I am a metered customer to them, and now I'm trying to make a profit on the customer that's using that electricity. And I'm going to have to be able to do that at some point in order to supply this as a benefit to our consumer, and in order to supply the stations that we supply on I-70, right? We have to make some money on charging as well as fuel, as well as diesel. It's not all done inside. The facilities we create, the bathrooms we provide, the amenities we provide there, cost dollars to have out there on I-70 in rural Kansas. And so we foresee a necessity to have a profit center out of EV charging at some point in the future.
Okay, it is 25 after. I want to thank everyone. We covered a lot of territory today, and with that, we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you.